Welcome to AlexGs Aquarium, everybody. Today we're going to have another update on the 1600 gallon system and what's going on in the tank right now. Oh, sorry. Hold on one second. Let's see who this is. Hello? Yeah. Okay. Alright. I'll be right up. Sorry, I normally leave my phone off while I'm filming, but I got a delivery for the 1600 gallon system. Let's go upstairs and see what it is. Hey Steve, how you doing?
Doing great. How you doing?
Pretty good. What'd you bring me today?
Well, I figured you're setting up a saltwater tank. You don't have a saltwater tank until you have some salt.
Alright, well let's see what you brought.
Got you some Fritz.
Awesome.
I think that'll do it.
I think so. About 2,000 gallons worth of salt ought to be enough. Give me a little bit of extra.
Yep, we're happy to drive it down here for you so that you can get that thing going and one day get some fish in there.
Well, if anyone wants to check out Steve's store, it's called Reef Plus. It's in North Aurora, Illinois. Tell them where it is, Steve?
Yeah, it's on the northeast corner of Oak and Randall Road. Our internet address is reefplus.net. You can also email me at reefplus@gmail.com, but we encourage you to stop on by the store in North Aurora. Yeah, we're open most days except Mondays.
Well, thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
I'm back down in the basement now. The salt's down here now, and I'm getting prepared to start mixing salt. And I want to talk a little bit about why I chose the Fritz RPM. I went with this not because anyone was sponsoring me. Fritz is not sponsoring this by any means. I went ahead and I decided that, I wanted to give this salt a try. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I've used other salts in the past. I've used Instant Ocean, Reef Crystals, ESV salt, and I've always had good results with all the salts. And I wanted to just try something a little different. And also the fact that this salt is available pretty readily at my local fish store, which is Reef Plus. That's one thing that I really want to talk about here for a second, just on salt and having, a good relationship with your local fish store. I know not everybody could say that they have a good local fish store in their area, but if you do, take the time and support these small businesses. They really do mean a lot to the community and help to support local reefers that, need supplies in urgent times of need and are willing to bring stuff in. Steve keeps this salt in stock, which is another reason that I decided to go with it. I like to be able to have options in case of emergencies. I don't like switching salt brands suddenly. And if I have an emergency, I'm going to need a fairly large quantity of salt fairly quickly. And knowing that he can get this in for me quickly and always has a little bit of a supply on hand at his store, that's one of the reasons that I went with this, is because it's locally available. And I would probably be a little nervous about getting salt in that I can't locally get, simply because if I have an emergency and need it, I'm not going to have access to it, which means I'm going to have to put my system at further risk of not only doing emergency water changes, but also trying to mix a new salt in, which I have seen some pretty bad results over the years with that happening. It's never happened to me. The first time it ever kind of came up, I really didn't think, much of changing brands of salt. I'd just never done it before. And I've seen people that have done big water changes with new salt brands, and because the mixes are different and the elements are all a little bit different, when you add it into your tank, it can really shock the system. In some cases, it can crash it if you're not careful. So whatever salt brand you decide to get for your tank, make sure that you can get it locally and easily. Even if you do order it online, make sure that there's some local suppliers of it as well. And of course, I always try to support the local fish store if they're doing a good business and they're helping out the reefing community. Let's go ahead and open up one of these boxes. I've never opened a box of Fritz salt, so I'm interested to see what it looks like. And then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to turn this tank into a 1,600 gallon saltwater system. I'm really excited about this just because It has been so long. I didn't buy any salt before. I stayed away from it because I knew it would be trouble once I got it. Good trouble, not bad trouble. But I have the salt. It's time to go ahead and start mixing it. Let's go in the fish room, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to get this tank mixed up for saltwater. I got my first box of salt here, opened up. Just looking inside, it's just a single bag. I got all 200-gallon mixes. They do make one, I believe, too, that has 4 50-gallon mixes, although it does cost a little bit more, I think, to get it separated. Could be wrong, though. One thing I'll note on this that I like just from the start here, because it looks like they're thinking about, you know, people not using all this at once. There's a zip tie holding this on, but it's a zip tie that can be reused. It's got a little extra clip on here so it can be released, put back, and pulled off. So nice little touch there. I'll give Fritz that. We're gonna have to see though how this salt actually looks. Just kind of grab it in here, see if it's really clumped up or anything. Looks pretty good though. It's very very powdery. As far as mixing salt into this tank, I took a much different approach than I normally would. Most of my tanks that I filled up with salt water, maybe I filled it up with fresh water, or maybe I didn't, I just filled them straight with salt water. Kind of gone a few different ways. There's nothing wrong with pre-mixing your water and putting it in the tank, but the only thing that I had as kind of a disadvantage is the sheer amount of salt I needed here. I mean, we're talking 1,600 gallons of water, that's 8 200-gallon mix boxes, and salt, when you start getting that quantity of it, it starts to add up in cost. That's why I filled these tanks with RO water. I chose RO water because I didn't want to have to drain them down. I wanted to be able to fill them, test them. If I ran into a problem like I did with the Boeing on the 720-gallon tank, I want to be able to take that tank, drain it again, and refill with RO, which is what I did. Essentially just like a water change on it. No harm, no foul. I didn't want to pump 720 gallons worth of salt down the drain. And go ahead and start adding this. I'm going to do it fairly slowly. I'm going to show you guys here how I'm going to do it. You probably can't see very well here, but I'm going to take the approach of this, of doing it slow and steady. I have no salt in here. And I'm not going to get to the point of doing any kind of measuring yet until I get at least 2 or 3 boxes in here just to see how detectable it's going to be. This is going to be a slow process. This tank cycles through this sump about every 15 to 20 minutes roughly. And I have actually taken the pump and diverted most of the water flow back into the sump. So there's some pretty heavy water flow in here right now. I'm going to slow it down to the tanks to give me a chance to do some mixing in here. I do have the heat exchanger in here, but I'm not really worried about that coil getting in the way. I want to make sure that I keep a huge amount of water flow going. Then I put a cup or 2 of salt in, sprinkle it in, and then slowly start mixing it up, and then we're going to worry about pumping it back to the main displays. Do the first one here. So far so good. I don't know how much of this bag. I don't think I've put very much of it in here, just a few scoops. And it seems like it's mixing up fairly well. I'm going to let this sit for a few minutes, and then I'm just going to repeat this process over and over again. Once I get a little bit of salt in here, I'm then going to go ahead, get out my hydrometer and my refractometer here so we can start to measure this salt a little bit. I don't really feel that there's a point in doing it yet, just because there's such a small amount in the tank. It's not even going to read yet. I'm going to go ahead and keep adding salt to the tank here. I'm going to probably get about 3 boxes in here or so, and then I'm going to go ahead from there and start to take a little time to do more measuring of the salt see where it actually is, get the refractometer out, also get my hydrometer out, and go from there. It has been a long 3 days. It's Saturday afternoon now, and I'm finally satisfied that my salt level is at 1.026. I use 2 different methods to measure my salt. I have a refractometer, and I also have a glass hydrometer. This is one that was recommended by the local fish store here. They're really precise. It's a tropic marlin. I've used floating hydrometers in the past, but never one that's graduated this much. This one only ranges from 1.021 to 1.031, so it's pretty fine scale, and I actually didn't notice it quite at first when I went to test my first level of salt with it. I'd only put in about 400 gallons worth of mix into the system, and I put it into floated. It just sunk straight to the bottom of my 480 gallon tank, and I was like, well, I guess there's not enough salt yet. And I went ahead and I did have them, you know, check this to one at the store that they use for all their systems and made sure that it was set up correctly. It does come in a nice little case here. One of the big drawbacks to some of these glass hydrometers is that, you know, if you happen to leave them floating in a tank or drop them, I mean, it can be bad. And always put them away when you're done. Don't ever leave them just floating in a tank. You're just asking for trouble, because all the little steel shot that's in the bottom of it, well, you're gonna find out how to extract steel shot from your sand bed if you have it, or tank, with a magnet. I've done it freshwater tanks with just regular thermometers, and I know it could happen with these as well. I've seen it happen when I used to work in stores. The other tool, of course, for measuring salt that I have is a refractometer here. This is an H2 Ocean salinity refractometer. I've had it for a few years, and I just checked it and calibrated it based on the settings of what they were seeing in the store off of their hydrometer and everything. So it's pretty much spot on. Right when I put straight RO water on it too, it'll read 0 like it's supposed to, and it's pretty much right in line with this glass hydrometer. And the funny thing is the glass hydrometer is actually graduated to a much finer scale than this is. So it's kind of nice just to have a couple of options. I always recommend having some kind of backup option whenever you're going to be testing your salt. And I did this in a very slow process, just what I already showed. I isolated the 120 gallon sump. Basically, I shut off the return valve to go to the tanks. I used the emergency pump hookup that I have in my plumbing in that 120 gallon sump. Just shoved a piece of 1.5 inch PVC in it, opened that valve, so it just made a loop from the return intake to that emergency hookup connection, and it just recirculated in there. And I continually would dump salt in. I was just using a solo cup to put salt in. I wasn't trying to measure anything specific because it's just way too much water volume. I went ahead and I put in anywhere from 5 to 10 cups of salt slowly, allow it to mix up, run my hand along the bottom of the tank, just kind of waving to make sure any salt accumulated, which there'd just be a couple little pockets here and there, that I would kind of stir it up and make sure that it was into that water. And it would be cloudy for about 5 to 10 minutes, I would say. I'd just walk away and let it recirculate in that tank. After I knew everything was dissolved, the water looked clear, I'd go ahead and open the valves up and allow it to enter the tanks. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes for all the water in the system to turn over through the return pump. Based on the flow of the return pump in here, I don't have the exact flow in gallons per hour. I'm guessing it's somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 gallons per hour of water running through it. And that way it would allow me to go through and see how everything was working. I did take my 150 gallon refugium tank and take it offline while I was doing this. I was kind of thinking I might have a little bit more displacement from adding the salt into the water and just seeing the water level rise from the salt being added, but it actually really didn't make a noticeable difference. I hadn't topped it off in a while. I really didn't need to. Really didn't notice anything big as far as displacement goes with it, which is good. It took me roughly 8.5 boxes of salt to get the salt level up to the 1.026. So as I kind of figured, mathematically I work out to a little more than 1,600 gallons. I don't count it just anything above that just because there's displacement of rocks and the sump tanks aren't all full all the time. There's some fluctuation. My first impressions though of using this Fritz salt though, it seems pretty good. The water in the tanks is fairly clear. There's a little bit of cloudiness in here. I kind of expected that in a way though. With it just being fresh water in here, a lot of the debris that had kind of settled around in the tank that really couldn't move before. As you add salt water, objects float a lot easier because it's more buoyant, because the water becomes heavier. And knowing that, I'm just letting everything kind of cycle through for a few days. I did notice the output of my 150-gallon refuge tank is making a little bit of a microbubble issue in the displays, just shooting a few in from the return. It's not a big deal. I can fix it. I don't have baffles in any of my sumps. I'm going to make something custom with that PVC train just to kind of make it go through a couple of sponges or something to make it go through a bit of a bubble trap so it doesn't wind up into the main displays all the time. It's not unsightly by any means, but it's a little noticeable. I did add 8 boxes of salt. I added 4 on Thursday night, 4 on Friday. It's Saturday now, and I slowly started adding another half box to the tank using the same method. The last thing I was kind of doing while the salt's been going into the tanks is I added an MP40 pump into my 150-gallon refuge. I just want more water flow in there eventually as I add more stuff in there. And there was quite a bit of debris that had settled in that tank, so it's been getting stirred around and should get filtered out in the next few days. Final thing I did while I was adding salt is made some modifications to the filter sock tray. Not the tray itself, but just to the water inflow into it. It was just a 2-inch piece of PVC. I teed it out and made a bit of a strainer on it with some PVC so the water will get distributed among filter socks. That's really what I wanted to talk about in today's video, was adding the salt. It was a fun process. I got boxes kind of stacked up here over my head. It was a lot of work. It was a time-consuming job. If you're going to be adding lots of salt to a tank, take your time. Don't dump it in all at once. You can have elements like your calcium precipitate out of it just because it's too high of a concentration. And that's why I took my time with it and raising the salinity up. There was no need to rush this process. And now that it has salt in it, I'm going to be able to move on to some next steps. The primary one is getting the protein skimmer operational, which, oh yeah, I think I might give you guys just a little preview of that. Take a look. I hope you enjoyed the preview for the protein skimmer video that's coming next week. I know it's not much of a preview, but I wanted to show a little bit because everyone has been asking about it. And I gotta say, hey, I have been really curious too. I want to see how this thing functions. It's only had salt in the tank for a good day now to where it had a more appropriate level to give me a little better idea of what's going on with it. We're going to focus on that next week, talk about what works with it, what might not work with it, because honestly I don't know yet. I gotta start toying with it and experimenting with it more. That'll be coming up next week. Of course, if you like today's video, please go ahead and give me that thumbs up. Let me know that I'm doing a good job. I also want to hear what kind of comments and questions you have on my salt choice. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Are you just not sure about it or have any questions on it? I'm interested to know. I really enjoy taking that time to interact with the community every week, and I hope I can answer some questions or at least give everybody a little bit of feedback. As always too, if you want to see more on the 1,600-gallon system, now that we have salt in it, there's not going to be a whole heck of a lot holding me back from adding at least a little starter life to this tank, other than doing some preliminary water testing to make sure everything's appropriate before adding life to the tank. And thanks again for watching, and I will see you on the next video.